Hi all, welcome to Anatomy and Physiology, or AP 102. This is bringing concepts of human anatomy and physiology to kind of the everyday person. So a lot of what we're going to do in this course is talk about different systems and then how it pertains to everyday life. Okay, so if you get a doctor's report, maybe you'll be able to read it. If you're an avid athlete or fan of professional athletes or fan of just sports in general, and someone gets an injury, that might give you this opportunity to actually understand where that injury is occurring, maybe how long it might take them to recover from that injury, those kind of things. Okay. Um, so again, before we get into the nuts and bolts and dive deep into the course, I think we should spend a little time on the history of anatomy and physiology. And that's what we're going to do today. Okay, so first off, from anatomy and physiology perspective, anatomy and physiology is a very old science. And what I mean by that is ever since cultures were developed, anatomy and physiology has been something of interest to people. Okay, so it probably started off first as you look at, your neighbor, or you look at someone else in your community, and they look different than you. And so the thought was, why? What makes them different? Okay, whether that be male versus female, male male, female female, whatever it might be. What's the differences? Why is there different? Why are some people shorter, taller, stronger? All these different things. There had to be kind of an underlining component to it, and that came in with kind of the anatomy perspective. Physiology, okay, goes hand in hand with anatomy. You can't actually have one with the other. Okay, physiology, and we'll look at definitions in a little while, but physiology is kind of the way at which the anatomy works. So the way that that organism moves, or the way that that organism digests material, or the way that that organism reproduces, the actual mechanism for the action is physiology. Anatomy is the actual structure. Okay, and we'll come back again and talk about these. Okay, so again, a lot of the early components, the early anatomy and physiology was really just about curiosity. How do things work? Okay? And the cool thing about that is, and as all society works and all fields of education and fields of knowledge and learning, as it works, is you stand on the shoulders of the individuals that came before you. And so anatomy and physiology is no different. Um, the individuals that came first, with all their dissections and documentations, have laid the groundwork for modern anatomy and physiology, which really can, in a lot of cases, you don't have to do the dissections anymore. Maybe you use a different piece of equipment, an imaging software, an imaging piece of equipment, instead of always cutting it into a body. And we'll talk a lot more about how those kind of things work. And along the way, there was lots of discoveries and then lots of rediscoveries. Lots of mistakes were made, misinterpretations of things, and we'll cover a few of those as we go too. Most of it probably starts in ancient Egypt, with kind of the documents that they left, the pictures that they drew on tapestry, on walls and things like that. A lot of them were of their mummification process, but some were like this one seen here, which we kind of interpret as not mummification, because you can see the individual's arms or hands are up in the air. So it seems like, and it looks like the individual's eyes are open. This individual is alive. Is way you might interpret this, and also maybe with the striations here, maybe the individual is, I don't know, maybe potentially being dissected alive, or maybe this is clothing. But given the document here, um, the individual seems to be alive, with the hands up and the open eyes. And so it's documents like this that really kind of give us this idea that during ancient Egypt times, they were recording medical observations, whether that be actually cutting into someone to see what's going on, um, if they have a broken bone or heavy, severe burns or something like that. They were recording these in medical observations on these tapestries or these papyries. Okay. The other thing is they definitely knew where certain organs were. Of course, the mummification process allows them to do that because they were, going through the body and doing that. But there's a little bit of a taboo here. In many cultures, you were not to um, open up an individual. Okay, so dissection was thought of as not being a proper process. So a lot of what was going on was maybe dissections in some cultures. In other cultures, it might have been uh, looking at animal models and then using the animal model to kind of project that onto a human. You also see this connection with emotion, okay, in these early kind of sketches. It seems like uh, they wanted to show that the individual was either in pain or that the individual was not in pain, or the individual had some type of emotion that was attached to it. Okay, so then, like I said before, like it was taboo in many cultures to actually dissect a human. And so a lot of the knowledge, or a lot of the material that's presented is a dissected animal, and it looks like they're making the connection between animal models and human models, which we currently do today all the time. Um, Physiology portion really comes in, I would argue, in ancient China and India, um, given a lot of the documents, the early texts, and the early material suggests this balance, this connection between the anatomy, between the structures, and how they work. Okay? So from the Yellow Empire in China to India with the Ayurvedic texts, showing not just surgeries, not just like advanced surgeries like cataract removal and things like that, but also plastic surgery is somewhat documented in the sense that material being removed and replaced with other material. Not to say it worked, not to say what happened to the individuals at this, at this time period after the surgery, but they definitely were doing surgeries. They were documenting surgeries. So they're doing the anatomy portion very similar to what was going on in Egypt. But then on top of it, they were talking about this holistic approach, this lifestyle balance, this medicinal medicine that they would use to kind of get at how systems function and how they might be connected. Okay. The first real individual I want to talk about, the first kind of individual that's been documented with a name, is Hippocrates. And really, it he's known as the father of medicine. Um, and that really comes about the pulling or the use of a lot of those remedies, a lot of that holistic approach that China and India was using, and then just combining it to a better degree with anatomy and physiology. Apart from that, also, instead of just claiming that a higher supernatural being is generating the um, disease that maybe individuals have, Hippocrates really didn't accept that kind of explanation, and so was looking for more natural causes. So if you eat this berry and you die, it wasn't due to a supernatural, but it's because the berry has toxins. And then what are those toxins doing to your organs? What's that toxin doing to the different systems? So connecting the dots a little better. Um, that's not to say that supernatural explanations went away. Okay, there was definitely still the supernatural explanation for how diseases moved through um, populations, but there's a lot more of, well, let's see if we can find an alternative explanation also, or a potential alternative explanation. Okay. Apart from that, he also developed what we call the four humors, or the theory of four humors. Okay, and that ideology really dominated medicine and dominated what we deem at this time civilized cultures, or civilized societies, for about 2,000 years. Right? Since, clearly it's been readjusted, and a lot of the terminology that was used at the time has been adjusted to modern times, and some things are somewhat true, and other things have been falsified quite a bit. And we may spend a little time talking about this, but um, it's ancient times. Okay. Okay. The next individual that I want to kind of discuss a little bit is Aristotle. Okay, Aristotle was really famous for science in general. Okay, so a philosopher and a naturalist, really wanted to connect the ideology that we are part of the natural world, that you know we can get diseases similar to other organisms in the natural world, and these kind of things, that things are not fixed. Okay, so Aristotle was one of the very first individuals to kind of talk a little bit about evolution, not using the term, but talking about adaptation or change in a population, or change in an individual over time. Aristotle talked about that a fair amount. He studied a lot of animal anatomy, and then used those animals as models for humans, and including distinguishing between veins and arteries. And so he was able to dissect out veins and arteries and track them back to regions, and made the distinction between those two, which was, at this time period, a very advanced surgical or um, dissective capabilities. And then there was a few things that had to be disproven later on, that stood for a very long period of time. Aristotle believed that the heart, given its location, since it's in the core part of the body, kind of centered, he believed that it was the site of intelligence. And of course, we know that that is not true. Herophilus of Chalcedon is probably one of the most famous kind of performers, I guess you could say. Herophilus was a very good anatomist, very good at dissection, uh, very meticulous, had good hand-eye skills, etc. And he is known as the father of anatomy. Right? Part of the reason why he had the capabilities that others at the time didn't is he lived or worked in Alexandria, and it was legal or permitted to dissect humans. Okay? For the most part, this legality or permission was for humans that were dead. However, there are some reports, and we'll talk a little bit about this here in a second, that he did what we call viva dissections or live dissections. Okay? But he discovered lots of different things. He discovered many different nerves, the optic nerve included. He discovered the parts of different parts of the brain, the ventricles. He discovered the difference between a motor and a sensory nerve, and many individuals question if you're talking about a cadaver, if you're talking about something that's already dead and doing these dissections, especially at this period of time, it'd be pretty difficult to tell the difference between a motor and sensory nerve or their functionality. And so a lot of stories slash reports of the time were that he dissected living criminals, and these were either individuals that were caught stealing or individuals that were caught that might not be part of the culture, or might be war criminals that were captured as part of the potential torturing mechanism. He would dissect them, and then this is how he really discovered motor and sensory nerves and the difference between motor nerves and sensory nerves. That's like, I'd say it's kind of a hypothesis out there, that that's what was going on. We don't really know for sure, but it kind of makes sense when you get down to it. Okay, so Galen of Pergam. Um, Galen was also similar in functionality or in skill with being anatomist and being highly skilled with dissection. Um, and he had lots of practice because he was a physician of gladiators. And so he saw lots of injuries. He got lots of practice working on individuals, seeing individuals with wounds that he could try to close up, or individuals that had died during sporting events, and then he would use their bodies to do research. He also used pigs and monkeys to apply his findings to humans. So this really started kind of, I'd say Galen was the start of using pigs and apes or primates to make that connection that we use all the time today. Now that pigs are very very similar to humans, and so are monkeys, and great apes are really really close to humans because we're part of that group. But having that connection to humans allowed him to not have to work as much with humans, and he could work with some other animals at the time. Some of the disproven pieces were things like Galen believed that blood was moved by the liver, and it was moved in waves, or what he called tidally. And so it would be pushed in waves, and the liver was providing that force to force those waves of blood. And that actually stood up. That belief that the liver was the powerhouse of the body stood for a very, very long time, roughly 1,000 years or so. Um, Individuals believed that the liver was what was moving blood in a human body. Okay, Galen also had what we call some showmanship to him. So similar to others, but maybe more theatrical than others prior to him. Galen would do dissections in large audiences, and his favorite, or the one that is most written about and most document, is his pig demonstrations. And so what he would do is he would strap a pig, and you can see in this picture, you can kind of see the straps around the leg of this pig that's laying on this platform. So there's the head and whatnot. And he would have it strapped down. And obviously, when a pig is strapped down, it's going to squeal often. And he would go in and he would cut the laryngeal nerve, which would cause the pig to stop squealing. Okay. Now, rumors slash documents, and however you want to look at this, suggest that Galen then could reattach the nerve. Okay. And so he could cause the pig to stop squealing and then reconnect the nerve, and the pig would start squealing again. And so he did this as kind of a theatrical or a demonstration of uh, his surgical capabilities, his anatomy capabilities. And that really cemented his idea that he was a very skilled anatomist. And he would often do this, and then the pig would be really unscathed, and he'd give the pig back to the farmer rancher that gave him the pig, and the pig would not be able to squeal any longer, which I guess was a good thing in some people's eyes. So, all right, when we come back, we'll talk about the Renaissance shift, because after the Renaissance, or during the Renaissance, we see a real shift in ideology. We see a shift in the role of science in a lot of this anatomy and physiology. Prior to really the Renaissance, a lot of the material was for show or to show off your skills and things like that, but it wasn't from a scientific method basis. And that's kind of part of that Renaissance shift.